Shalom und herzlich willkommen bei Israel Insight, auch heute wieder mit Global Israel Leadership. Jeder Israeli ist ein Vertreter seines Landes, ein Ambassador. Und im Augenblick setzt sich in Israel jeder für sein Land ein. Nicht nur als Soldat im Gazastreifen oder in der Versorgung, sondern jeder, der irgendwo sieht, dass Hilfe gebraucht wird, fasst mit an. Das ist eine unglaubliche Geschichte. Darum wird es vielleicht auch heute gehen, aber wir haben einen besonderen Vertreter, einen besonderen Ambassador seines Landes Israel heute zu Gast und im Gespräch. Und ich bin sehr glücklich, dass Daniel Carmon wird uns berichten. Und in seinem Leben fokussiert sich auch das Leben und die Entwicklung des Staates Israel nochmal auf besondere Weise. Als Vertreter seines Landes war Daniel Carmon 1978 in Camp David dabei, als Frieden ausgehandelt worden ist. Und hat natürlich auch das Scheitern des Friedens erlebt. Und ich würde mich heute auch über Frieden und das Scheitern auch des Friedens mit ihm unterhalten. Und Daniel Carmons Leben ist auf engste Weise mit dem Terrorismus verbunden. Am 17. März 1992 war er in der diplomatischen Vertretung Israels, als dort dieser gewaltige Bombenanschlag war. Und er blieb zurück mit seinen 5 Kindern, nachdem er seine Frau dort verloren hat. Und nur als dritte Station, er ist verbunden, auch wie wenige andere, mit Israel als einem aufstrebenden Land, das mit anderen aufstrebenden Ländern verbunden ist und ihnen hilft und man sich gegenseitig hilft. Er war lange Zeit Diplomat in Neu-Delhi und in enger Verbundenheit mit Indien. Also Themen genug, auch natürlich über die Gegenwart und den Krieg. Ich gebe nach Australien an Eitan Drori, den ich herzlich begrüße. Auch begrüße Joram Ehrlich in Saarbrücken wieder von Global Israel Leadership. Eitan, du wirst ein paar Worte auch noch zu Daniel sagen und dann stellt er sich vor und wir kommen ins Gespräch. Vielen Dank.
Rick, thank you really so much for hosting us and for your cooperation and friendship along the way, especially since the breakout of the war on the 7th of October this year. We are now the 59th day of the war, and thank you, Joram, for your initiative, as usual, a partner and friend in Germany that in a way takes care of the Israelis and their needs in the Republic of Germany. Ambassador Daniel Carmon is a childhood friend of mine from Jerusalem, and not to mention that Yoram's grandparents lived in Jerusalem as well, and they're very much connected to Israel. Later on, I'll tell Dani who is Yoram, so you'll be very surprised. So in a way, I wanted to say that in addition to your warm words about Ambassador Carmon, we have also to remember that he represented Israel as deputy head of the delegation to the UN for some years. He was also deputy director general of the Ministry for Foreign Affairs, in charge of the Mashav, is the Israeli Agency for International Development Cooperation. We have non-diplomats who serve in the state of Israel, and the selective experts in different fields, if it's in medicine, in agriculture, and other contributing disciplines to especially third world countries, is very known, and Dani was really the person to run it as number 2 of the office of Ministry for Foreign Affairs. I met Danny in Delhi on his last year as ambassador of the State of Israel to the subcontinent India. And the one thing that I like to highlight is that he is a retiree from the Ministry for Foreign Affairs, but he is married to Ditsa, the mother of his sixth kid, who is a senior diplomat and in charge of a major strategic department in the Ministry for Foreign Affairs today. And as a retiree, he doesn't give up. And now, and that's something that I asked him very much to speak, is about his involvement during the war now in two major initiatives. If you remember, we mentioned always that the people of Israel, in a way, took command on our life and created very unique bodies that Danny, he's very much directly involved, and this is what I can tell, and all the rest I leave for Danny. Ambassador Carmon, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for those warm by both of you, Riklef and Eitan. I must admit, Riklef, that I understood a little bit of the German as a kid. In the 50s, I lived in Prague, Czechoslovakia, in the worst days of our relationship with the Eastern Bloc, and my nanny was German, so I knew German at the time. Believe it or not, I knew German at the time. I think that one of the phenomena that we are seeing in Israel in the last year, it's been more than a year, but more or less a year, is the upsurge of the civil society in Israel. It is an unbelievable movement. It has various faces. And I can say as a witness from a little bit aside, but also very much inside these manifestations of the civil society. One, I would call it until the 7th of October, and you heard a lot about the upheaval, if I can call it upheaval, of the protest movement, which engulfed so many people in Israel who were petrified by the possibility of losing our democracy. Because what we saw, and I'm not going to elaborate on that because this is not the issue at stake, but what we saw, and I'm talking about millions and millions in Israel, and Israel altogether, as you know, is not more than 9 million, around 9 million, but millions of people joined this cry, this shouting, this upheaval of God, don't take these very important characteristic of the state of Israel, something we've been so proud of during all those years, away from us. And the danger existed. And maybe the danger will exist in the future, but I think things have changed dramatically. That's until the 7th of October. On the 7th of October, we took everything aside. All what we've been talking until the 7th of October did not disappear, but we took it on a different, totally different level of preference and priority. Because what we saw on the 7th of October, and I have a feeling that you abroad saw much more than we saw, because all the evidence, the videos, the clips, the details of what has happened to our people and to foreign visitors in Israel is really something that I'm not sure we have seen in the last decades. Such a thing, and a threat not only on Israelis, it's not another round of terrorism as we've seen since 2006 when we disengaged from Gaza, when Israel disengaged from Gaza. where there was this repetition of rounds of hostilities and then some arrangements and rounds of hostilities and some arrangements, etc. This is a completely different ballgame, and I wish it was a game, because it's really a terrible thing that has happened. I don't want to say we are used. We're not used. We cannot be used to terrorism being inflicted upon us, because we cannot get used to this. But we never understood, we never knew that on the other side of the Gaza so-called border, a whole generation of terrorists, and that's the mildest thing that I can say about them, is terrorists. There are other definitions, are growing up, are planning, helped by other countries, and training and preparing for the day in which they can infiltrate into Israel, make use of a huge a disaster, a real disaster happened with a few, I would say, big mistakes that were done, false mistakes that will be investigated in due time, both on the military intelligence level and on the interpretation of the data that was there. That's the tragedy of it, because the information was there. It reminds us a little bit of the 73 war, what is called the conception, the conceptia, and the operative level. The army was not there to respond. And I'm sure we will all hear in due course, and I'm stressing in due course, we will all hear what has happened and how it happened. And many of the people in charge, especially from the defense establishment, have already taken responsibility. They said out loud, without any hesitation, I was responsible for bringing security and defense and the sense of security. It's not less important than the security itself. And I'm responsible. This is what those 4 or 5 guys have said. And in due course, I will sort of hinting that when the day comes, they will translate into this taking upon themselves responsibility into deeds. But in the meantime, there is a war to fight and a war to win. And there is no doubt that this is a self-defense war, undoubtedly. And I think the world understands it. Even those who say they don't, they understand it, let alone those countries and people, and Germany is definitely one of them, if not one of the leading in that, who not only understands, but tells us, yeah, Hamas should be eliminated, at least its military capabilities, but it's more than the military capabilities. Will it happen? I don't know. But I mean, on the eliminating of Hamas as an idea, I'm not sure it is possible, but eliminating the military force of Hamas is the main objective of this war. Another objective, which started a little lower in the priorities of the people of Israel and the government of Israel and all concerned, is the safe return of all hostages. It has changed a lot. The priority, I must say, was a little lower in the last few days when we were really, we didn't know what was happening really. And this is where we came in, amongst others, but something that going back to the civil society's role, remarkable role in all of that. A day or two after the 7th of October, a few people took initiative on the background of the fact that the government was non-existent in this area, too much busy in fulfilling other targets and aims on the first 2 days of the war, and established civil society, established through few very innovative, I would say, and long-term thinking, what is called the Forum of Hostages and Missing Families. It's a forum that nowadays has thousands of volunteers. We were working from one building in the city part of the city of Tel Aviv, the financial district. Now we've moved to another place. There are hundreds on a given moment of volunteers in various fields, with one angle at sight, and one and only angle is to help the families, to represent the families and to help the families of the hostages. Psychology, social, daily routine help to pay a bill when there is a complication. I don't know how to get from one place to another. PR, press, judicial, medical, and diplomatic, and maybe more. Maybe I've left some and they will excuse me, but the idea really is to help the families in a way that from time to time could not, or maybe do not coincide 100% with the government. This initiative has evolved into a whole operation, and that's the example that I wanted to give you of the civil society doing something very important, parallel to coordinating in some areas with the government, in some areas doing things that the government cannot and will not and does not want to do. And that's a concerted effort. And I'm wanted to share this with you, and I'm proud that our civil society can come in where government, at least in the first stage, does not. The apparatus nowadays of government has recuperated. The government has its own branches dealing, of course, with the negotiations, which is something totally different, but we're not dealing with negotiations at all, nothing. And I think it's very important to make the distance between one and the other. But any field, anything that we can bring, we are a group of 15 ex-ambassadors, including the last ambassador to Germany, Mr. Issacharov, who is part of this group of ours. We are trying with one thing in our mind, which is only the families. We might even do something that is contrary to the government if the families ask. We could approach a country that has no diplomatic relations with Israel if the family wants it and if we can help with it, with our experience and knowledge and connections. And one example I would give you, we have very complicated relations with the United Nations as such. And we are from time to time in crisis with the organization, not to say that sometimes with some of the membership. And that's another story that we could talk for days. A week ago, we, the diplomatic families and families of hostage forum, wrote a letter to the Secretary General, Antonio Gutierrez, and we wrote to him as a group of ex-ambassadors, listen, this cannot continue. The United Nations, where we are shareholders and stakeholders, we cannot agree to the fact that after what happened in the 7th of October, the United Nations condemns Israel as if, nothing happened, more or less. very subtle, here and there, couple of words. But where is the UN? Where is UN Women with what happened to the women of Israel? Where is the right of the child? Where are we wrote to him a very nice letter, but very strong one. 10 minutes, I'm not joking. 10 minutes after he got the letter, he called the person who was Ambassador Coletta Vital, who signed the letter in the name of all of us. And he tried to, I won't go into the conversation itself, but it just shows the strength such a group of people has, and we're doing it in various ways, like sending delegations, speaking with ambassadors. German ambassador, by the way, is top of the list. We spoke with 50 ambassadors. We meet the international community, and we're trying to help the families as much as we can.
Yeah. Daniel, I have the impression that men, the society is the weakest and the strongest part at the same time. And the terrible terror and the brutal behavior of Hamas revealed that Israel hoped that the technology could save the frontier, and they neglected the human factor. And now we see Israel is very strong, standing together, helping each other. And I think my impression is Israel has learned a lecture, or is learning a lecture in a positive way. Do you see it in a similar way?
Israel, as you see it from the 7th of October, is not the same Israel as you have seen before.
Yeah.
We need, and I'm not an ambassador anymore. Thank you, Eitan, for reminding me that I was, but I'm not. I only have the retired title. I can say whatever I did not say for 45 years, even though I proudly represented all the governments of Israel during that short period of 45 years. But we need a restart. We need a reboot. And this reboot, as you said, Riklef, is after we learned, I hope we learned a lesson. But the lesson is not only to correct things that we did not do right, although like in any country, we did things not in the right way. But there is sometimes a feeling, and I'm sure Eitan and Yoram, we are probably from the same, I know which generation is Eitan, I guess Yoram is also from the same generation. When we grew up, if I may say so, in the 50s, we felt and we were educated to feel that we grow up with the country. The country is a child that has to be nurtured in the same way that we were children that were nurtured. After all what our ancestors and fathers and mothers have gone throughout the years on the way to immigrate to Israel, and of course during the Holocaust, and we grew up with the country. It was a real feeling. And then something happened. If I may put my finger, I would put my finger on 1967. Something happened in 1967 when we were Six-Day War, of course. The results of the Six-Day War, when you look at them in the perspective of history, is not a good thing that happened to the Israeli people. We started being confronted with terrorism. We are a force that had to impose with maybe good reasons. I mean, you can have the argument that we had no choice. Of course, reunification of Jerusalem is very important, but maybe not all the territories that we are now in, or that not all the West Bank. Definitely Gaza was something that what I'm saying is something happened to our people in 1967, and it's not a good thing. And then it developed and developed throughout the years. And in some ways, and I'll be as frank as I can with you, in some ways we've lost it. We got a lot of technology. We became a superpower in defense, in high tech, in innovation. I mean, can you believe that Israel is selling to Germany high-level systems of defense from anti-aerial? I mean, it's unbelievable when you think about it. But on the more individual level, we lost it. We educate generations of people who have served in the territories, and it's not a good thing. It's not a good thing. Maybe I would not go in the political debate, should we be there or not be there? How can the Palestinians achieve a state of their own? And they have to achieve a state of their own. I'm not going into the political discussion. I have to say that as a citizen, I see my fellow citizens who have changed throughout the years from 1967 till now, and I hope that the 7th of October, which is a huge disaster that we will talk about for years and years to come, maybe has changed something and put us into a different proportion. And so your question is very relevant. I must add something else, which is also on the individual side, and I read it this morning. And it also goes to the individual testimonies of people from the kibbutzim around Gaza. Many of them politically are people of peace. I don't want to say left, but peace. Kibbutzim are socialists, they have to be somewhere center left. But so many people who were killed were activists. One lady who was taking Palestinian sick people from the border to Beersheba hospitals on a daily basis sometimes. All sorts of activity. And they feel, and that's the least that they can say, they feel betrayed on a personal level. Not getting from the one hand the defense that they should receive from Israel, which is one thing that I take aside, but the big betrayal is from the Palestinians living in Gaza, who were coming every day to the kibbutzim to work, and to get a salary from an Israeli employer, you get much more than you get from a Gaza employer. Coming to Israel by the hundreds to work in kibbutzim, in the cities, in the localities, and actually, besides working, they were gathering information, and they were drawing the maps, and they were saying, the commander here lives in house number 7, and it was written in documents that were found. So the betrayal of people on the individual basis, Mr. So-and-so from Gaza came to work in kibbutz so-and-so and was an intelligence officer for Hamas. And that's another sense that you cannot ignore. It's an individual, it's like it's being stabbed, and it's actually some words stabbed in the back by people you thought were partners or people who worked with you or for you, and that's a terrible sentiment also.
I wanted to ask you here, Danny, I think you touched in a way a wound, that we all carry at the moment. And I wanted to ask you about, let's say we put us, the Israelis who are living outside Israel, as an element of support for the state of Israel. And one item that we hear on a daily basis, it doesn't matter where, if it's in Europe, Australia, South Africa, or America, or Canada, we hear our friends criticizing us for not being able to put the message across. And the Israelis are doing it now, as we say in German, zum Beispiel, for example, with Wycliffe. We are doing it with John Lockwood in Australia. We're doing it with other Christian leadership, and putting your message now across via our channels. This is something that Israel should take into consideration, that the fifth tribe of the Israeli society, those over 1 million Israelis who live outside Israel, are calling you through personal relations, through public diplomacy, through a day-to-day networking that we all living around the world, to speak to the hundreds and thousands supporters of Wycliffe's, Ve'ahavta, or kingdom builders, to hear the truth outside the real diplomacy. And that's something that tells you that there is no only a public diplomacy in Israel that you represent by working for those organizations. We are talking about public diplomacy outside Israel that supports the nation. As Wycliffe says, we're all living and supporting our home, Israel. If you could respond to that, and then probably Yoram will say something.
Only to add, we have, it was an initiative for my sister in Israel. She's the tour guide, and she said, as the war began, we have to tell our friend what happened in Israel. So we opened this WhatsApp group with Wycliffe, which called Israel at War Daily Update. So we give their perspective from Israeli media. That is what we give, also sometimes from other media, but with media which we translate in German, so everybody understand. And I know people come to me and ask, thank you for what you do, because we didn't get this information in other ways. So although the Israeli embassy and the Israeli general consulate make a lot of information and send a lot of, and meet a lot of people, it's not the same as we as Israeli and Wycliffe as a public diplomacy, what we can do according to our experience and knowledge. It's actually another perspective.
Yes, thank you. I have to say, I don't know enough about the activities, and maybe that's my problem, not knowing enough. But I must tell you that diplomacy is not the same now as it was when I personally entered the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 1973, a couple of years ago. Diplomacy has changed its face totally. And my friends maybe in the ministry will not like what I'm going to say, but diplomacy does not belong to diplomats only. Maybe the word diplomacy is sort of, problematic in this field, but what is important is the activity itself. And we used to say that every Israeli who goes out for any reason, tourism, business, work, whatever, the moment he gets his stamp on a passport and goes abroad, he's an ambassador. And we by the way, it was that way in the past, I'm sure, and still is. I remember as a kid, I always wanted to show my foreign friends that we are alike, that we have the same traditions, the same way of living. We don't have only camels in Israel. There are other things in Israel. So that's some kind of, how would I say, public diplomacy. When I come to your question, Yoram and Eitan, I definitely think that even if you don't call it public diplomacy, or if you do call it public diplomacy, it doesn't matter. The importance of what you're doing is is of utmost importance, and in a world which is so much suffocated, we are all suffocated with information. We don't always know what is right, what is wrong, what is fake, what is not fake. And I'm sure that you three who represent the other branch, I would say, and I really appreciate especially what Wycliffe is doing, because you're not an Israeli, it's really remarkable what you're doing, and I think I would encourage you to do so. I know that in the last few years, I know it a little bit from Eitan, there has been some development in recognizing the Israelis abroad as another force or power or something that Israel can count on. And I know you had a few meetings and congresses and things like this. I would encourage it. And I think it's a fact. Even those who want to deny this fact, it's a fact. And maybe I'll tell Wycliffe that in the past, again, in the 50s, 60s, people who would emigrate outside of the country were looked at in a very negative way. Not anymore, for years now. Not anymore, first of all, because it's a fact. And Eitan said more than 1 million people. I didn't know it was more than 1 million, but it's a fact of life. You cannot deny it. I'll tell you a story. In the forum that I'm volunteering in, we meet delegations from time to time. On Thursday, I met like 6 delegations. 2 of them were 2 delegations from an organization, maybe you know it, Momentum, an organization called Momentum. You know it, Eitan?
Yeah.
50 people in each one. One was a delegation of parents, and one was a delegation of fathers, and half an hour later, a delegation of mothers. Probably the same delegation, but they were divided because they have probably other questions to address. And I spoke to both delegations. What was amazing, 2 things. And there were people from the United States, all of them. 2 things were amazing. One of them was that many of those parents, fathers and mothers, have kids who serve in IDF as what we call lone soldiers. It's a different category. It's not a category, but they have other, serving conditions. What was amazing, not less, was the fact that I did not count one by one, but I feel that these 50 people delegation of fathers and 50 delegation of mothers had around 25% of them were Israelis. Israelis who live abroad and come back with solidarity and come back to visit Israel and come back to visit their kids. And I told them, we admire you. We admire you. I was abroad when my kids were in the army, and I know what it is when your kid is in the army and you're waiting for the phone call. And I told those guys, I admire you. Not only thank you for the solidarity that you're bringing to the families, but I admire you for letting your kids serve the country that once was a country where you reside, and now is a country that you are very interested in its well-being and security and resilience. And I think it, in some way, it represents what you asked about the role of Israelis who live abroad. It's not only Hasbara, it's not only public diplomacy, it's the fact that while physically being abroad, your heart and minds are here, even if you're in Australia, as far as Australia.
Yes. I think that one expertise that you, in a way, explored with me was, and that's something interesting, I think, for Wycliffe and his supporters and friends of the organization Ahavta, is, if you remember, on the eve of our conference in Jerusalem in 2017, you told me about the non-resident Indian concept for the diasporic Indian community worldwide, and how India is treating them. And in a way, I took this model and spoke about it very openly with the president of the State of Israel, with other officials. And this situation today with the war tells you that, of course, not only in India, the phenomena is also in France, where you have a Senate member taking care of the French diaspora worldwide. And I think that this is something that we should, in a way, find an opportunity after the war, is to really build a bridge and tell, look, we are not official agencies, but we need to work together in conjunction with the government.
Yeah.
Yeah. Daniel, let me ask to diplomacy and politics in a more narrow sense. I have the impression that what Israel is doing now or has to do is formulated in a not too small way in Washington. And there is a lot of traveling of Blinken and transferring it to the Middle East. And are the United States able to define what Israel has to do to reach its goals or to end the war? I fear that there is a danger that not the Israel goals, but the goals of USA and the election next year is speaking a very strong word.
That's a very complicated question regarding the fact, on the background of the fact that there are also Israeli internal politics involved also. Very complicated ones. And another very complicated thing is the fact that there is no distance in the eyes of our prime minister, who is a very talented person, very smart person, but unfortunately he has lost it. And there is a mixture of his personal interests and the interests of the country. And in many ways, he does not define, probably, I mean, I'm not there, I cannot say 100%, but the results of what he's doing or not doing could be detrimental. I'll give you one very important example of it. The whole country, think tanks, institutions, universities, academia, are thinking about the day after. The day after the war ends. It's important. Not what is the aim, the immediate aim of the war, which is clear. I don't know if we will reach it or not, but the aim is clear. And the war will be a war. I mean, it is a war. But what happens in the day after? And there is more than a hint, even within the public, who read papers, who see tweets and see the TV, that he would prefer not to think about the day after. And I'm not sure he instructed people under him not to do that, but I think there is a sense that Israel does not have to think about the day after, which is crazy when you think of it. It's terrible to think about it. So someone said as a joke, but it's a very serious joke, maybe the Americans have thought about the day after and they will tell us what the day after will be. Maybe Blinken, in all his travels, is not only saying, okay, continue to do this because it's important, be very careful with the humanitarian, which is true, by the way, be very careful with the humanitarian, and think about the day after. And this is what we think should be in the day after. And Biden has already said that the Palestinian Authority should have a role, no matter how it is done, but it should have a role in the future long-term solution. Netanyahu, until today, has said that the Palestinian Authority cannot have a role, and he said something to help the argument, saying something which is very true. How can we have, not that I agree with him, but he said something that is that could be understood. How could we have a partner like the Palestinian Authority when until today Abu Mazen has not condemned the 7th of October? How can it be possible? And in this, he's right. But his real reasoning is not that. If he wanted the Palestinian Authority, he would have he has his partners in the government. There are two extreme right-wing, extreme messianic, extreme parties that are part of the puzzle of this government. And if you take their part in from the puzzle, he doesn't have a government. And if he doesn't have a government, he can control less his personal future, etc., etc., etc. So it's very, very, very complicated. If I mentioned the extreme parties, they're, I would say, almost using or misusing the war in Gaza in order to act in other fields. You have the Minister of Internal Security who is giving out personal arms to people for the sake of security, and he has all the arguments of the world, but it's terrible to think about it. And the other one is encouraging or not preventing settlers' activities in the West Bank, which is terrible, which is also a challenge to the Americans, because when we disengage from northern Samaria, it's called, there were some promises given to the Americans, but nowadays there are a bunch of settlers, and I'm not talking about thousands, dozens and hundreds is enough, who make trouble, who do not let the Palestinians live their lives, who provoke things, a terrible situation that will explode. It will explode, and the Americans remind us of that all the time. And that's besides the actual problem, it's a ticking bomb that we sometimes forget, but it's, on the other hand, it's a fourth front. We have four fronts. We have Gaza, we have the north, we have the West Bank, and I'm talking about the terrorists in the West Bank, not the settlers, and we have the Yemen Yemen threat with the ballistic missiles that they're sending from there. So the situation is very, very complicated. And we are going through a very, very tough time. And I think that friends like you not only encourage in words, but in deeds. And I really want to thank you for that.
I wanted to thank you. And before Wycliffe, you will close. I just wanted to thank you, Danny, because what you created in me definitely is that we are facing at the moment a dilemma. We are on a crossroad. We don't know what will bring us tomorrow. And I think you did it very authentic and gave us the picture as is to tell that it's not only the world is unclear, it's also about us being unclear and breaking our head what will be the tomorrow of after the war. So thank you very much from far away Australia.
One
Thank you,
word
please.
more. Hashtag bring them home now.
That's it, definitely. Hashtag bring them home now. We have our supporters in Australia, I'm sure in Germany as well, selling T-shirts all over as a donation for your efforts and blessing for what you're doing. Riklef, it's you now.
Ja. Wir haben eine kurzfristige Vision, nämlich die gefangenen Geiseln aus dem Gazastreifen wieder in ihrer Heimat zu sehen und zu Hause. Aber Daniel, du hast auch gesagt, wir haben 4 Fronten. Gestern gab es wirklich die ersten Anschläge auf gar nicht mit Israel verbundene Schiffe in der Seefahrt. Das heißt, die ganze Welt ist betroffen. Und ich glaube, dass wir es noch ein bisschen mehr lernen müssen über das, was uns die Zeitungen sagen, über das Tagesgeschäft hinaus, auch zu sehen, wie wir verbunden sind mit dem, wofür Israel kämpft. Dafür brauchen wir das Gespräch mit Menschen wie dir, auch mit Eitan und Joram. Dafür bin ich sehr dankbar und hoffe, dass wir es auch zu einem friedlicheren Zeitpunkt werden fortsetzen können. Vielen Dank und Shalom nach Israel.
Dankeschön.
Thank you, danke schön.
Wo man